Good morning. Welcome. We'll get started here in just one moment. Hopefully everybody's ready to party. Good morning. All right. I know it's a little late on a Saturday morning for me. I do apologize. I did enjoy. Oh, I didn't really sleep in, but yes. Good morning. Welcome. Are we ready to learn something new today, or at least get some more patterns for more possible things that you want to make? All right. Yes. Okay. Let's get started. So first, I am it's in the comments, it's in the original description on the post, as well as I am putting it in the comments right now, and I'm going to pin it to the top so that everybody can see it. This is the link to download all the patterns that I'm going to talk about. Yes. I do look different. I have very straight hair today. The curls are gone, at least until I add water. So I was up bright and early so that I could go have my hair straightened, because it's way faster if Melissa does it for me than if I do it. So yes. So all right, let's get those jelly rolls off the shelf and let's get them sewn into a quilt. All right. So if you don't know, the very first jelly roll was only created and hit the market in 2006. So it's really not even that old per se, right? So he's still young, the jelly roll is. All right, 1 second, get this camera lined up here. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about or share here this morning, and kind of the concept is that we all collect jelly rolls, right? We put them on the shelf. They look so pretty. Sometimes we have a hard time. I don't know what I want to do with it, or it's just so pretty I don't want to cut it. Or you have, my issue is like, well, if I sew this out of it, what am I going to do if I find something I like better out of it? And then I don't have another one. So then that just spirals me into not using any of them. But my goal today is I have 15 patterns to share with you. I'm going to talk about a couple of techniques, things that you can use to use those jelly rolls that are sitting in your sewing room and just dying to be turned into something beautiful. Now, many of you are probably familiar, for the most part, with the 1600 quilt. You may not be. It's also known as the jelly roll race quilt. It's where we sew all the jelly roll strips end to end, and we just keep sewing them into loops and cutting and loops and cutting. Well, this quilt, called Type It, is kind of that concept, except it adds an accent color. And Type It here. So it adds an accent color. So instead of it just being all the same jelly roll, okay, it is, you take one full jelly roll and you take a white or an accent color. It doesn't have to be white. It could be black. It could be gray. It could be anything you want. But you only need what we call a jelly roll junior. Okay. So a junior jelly roll is half the number of strips. Okay, it's only about 20. So the way that this particular project works, okay, is you're going to take your jelly roll strip, Okay, so a jelly roll is a 2.5 inch wide strip. You are going to sew that strip, okay, to a 2.5 by 20 inch strip. Now, I don't have a full 45-inch strip here because I can't, it won't fit all on the screen. So I kind of modified everything down into smaller pieces so that we can see it all on screen. But you're basically going to sew that strip into a tube with the 20-inch accent color. Okay, so you have a 45-inch print to a 20-inch accent color. Once you have that sewn into a tube, you're going to pick somewhere along this color to cut it. So I'm just going to pick a section. I'm going to cut it so that it will open up into a nice long strip with my white in the middle. Okay? And then basically you're just going to randomly continue to do that. Okay? Let me lift this up. This may be a little bit better. We're just going to randomly continue to sew. Now, if I can get the stand to tighten, it will be a different story. You know, it's not one thing. There we go. It's not one thing, it's another. So you're going to randomly continue to sew every jelly roll print strip to a 20-inch or a half jelly roll strip. And then you're going to randomly cut them apart. And then you sew them together. Okay? And we would just put it right sides together. And that's going to make that this strip that runs down. That's not equal. It kind of moves itself back and forth. I was never really a fan of the jelly roll race quilt. Okay? Not my favorite, but I like it when we add something a little bit more to the jelly roll race concept. We add in an accent strip, we add in an accent square, things along that lines. So it's very, very helpful. So this is Type It. Okay. So you can see what that quilt looks like. Really quick, really fast. Yes, you don't have to you could cut your own jelly roll strips, especially if you have a jelly roll but you don't have a junior jelly roll laying around, because typically your junior jelly rolls are going to come in, we sell junior jelly rolls in solid colors, in Moda Grunge, things along that lines are in juniors. But yes, you can totally cut your own 2.5-inch strips, and if you are an AccuQuilt owner, you can really cut them quickly by using the 2.5-inch strip die. All right, so Crazy Labyrinth is a log cabin. So 2 jelly rolls and a 1/4 of a yard of a solid, or whatever you want to use for the center of your log cabin, even though this is a little more like a courthouse step. But this, in the image here, this blue, let's come back here, this blue, okay, is that solid. And what's nice about this is that it is very scrappy, okay, also great for scraps when, maybe you're finished with a quilt, things along that lines. In the pattern, gives you all the different dimensions that you need to cut. There is no light and dark. It's just cut your scraps and start sewing them together. This particular pattern is almost what I would reference as almost like a crumb quilt. You could use it to use a lot of those leftover scraps. It's like the perfect thing for all those leftover bindings that you didn't use all of. Take those 2.5-inch strips, iron them back out flat, and cut them into the sizes that you need for the Crazy Labyrinth. Okay. All right. So some of you may be wondering, where did the name Jelly Roll come from? And pretty much we all like to eat sweets, right? We won't pass up a dessert for the most part. And the jelly roll, when it's rolled up, it looks kind of like a jelly roll cake, jelly roll pastry. So that's what started the bakery theme in the world of Moda. Moda was the first to put out and create the jelly roll. Other companies call them other things because the jelly roll is Moda's name. So you've got strips, you've got treats, you've got roly-polies, lots of other things. For the most part, they're all 2.5-inch strips. Okay, but the jelly roll started the bakery theme, which is where layer cakes came from, honey buns, things along that line. So Moda has kept into the dessert theme for all the pre-cuts. Next up, we're going to talk about strip quilts. Okay, so the first up is Step This Way. Step This Way is going to use one jelly roll. Actually, it's only going to use 36 strips of a jelly roll. Okay. And you will need a background or a setting fabric. So in the image, that setting fabric is white. Okay, that's there. So give me 1 second. Let me get my Step This Ways little steps for you. Okay. Basically, you're going to take 2 jelly roll strips. You're going to take get the right thing here. You're going to get one of your setting color, whatever color your background is, and then you're going to sew a jelly roll strip to it. So you're going to create this strip set of 2 2.5-inch strips. Once you have this sewn, okay, we're going to cut this into a 4.5-inch unit. So we're creating a 2-rail fence. So this should measure 4.5 inches, all right, in height. Now here's a trick for you, or here's a note. If you're not super great with a 1/4-inch seam, or maybe, you struggle at keeping an exact quarter, or maybe this fabric is, you were a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, we need this to be a square, okay, once we cut this. And so if this ends up in height at like 4.25, and then you turn around and cut this at 4.5, you don't have a square, right? And in this pattern, when we go to rotate one block and sew it together, one block is going to be larger than the other. So what I do, and I suggest, especially for some of my beginners, and if you're not a beginner, because, some things, after you have sewn and pressed your strip set, I recommend measuring it. Okay? So just take your ruler and measure it and see what height it is. Whatever your height is what you're going to cut in width. So if you measured this and it was 4 inches, you're going to cut 4 inches, not the 4.5 that the pattern says, because again, we're going to be rotating these units to be using them at different angles, and we need them to be the same measurement, both top to bottom and left to right. Okay, so just a little trick for you, or not really a trick, just a general note. You also, if you own an AccuQuilt, okay, my AccuQuilters, you could take your 4.5-inch strip die, if you have it. You can rotate your strip, lay it across the 4.5-inch strip die, and run it through the machine, and it will cut your 4.5-inch units for you, okay, provided that this measures 4.5. But anytime you are subcutting your strip set, you can use your strip dies. So normally we would cut our fabric on the strip die this way. If we rotate it and lay it on the strip die perpendicular to the blades, that will subcut our unit for you. Okay, so you don't have to hand cut them all. So just a little note. So with Step This Way, basically you are using the background fabric, okay, to create a little zigzag. Okay, so you're going to alternate your location of your background fabric or your setting fabric or your accent so that it creates a zigzag. Okay, very easy. Oops, let's put that one the right way here. So this one goes up. Okay, so it creates these steps throughout the quilt. All right, so that's Step This Way. Now, another variation of the Step This Way pattern is going to be Candy Shop. Candy Shop, same concept, same unit, except with Candy Shop, there is no setting fabric. This is 100% jelly roll. Grab your jelly roll, sew 2 strips together randomly in color assortments. Press the strip, the seam towards the darkest, and then cut them into 4.5-inch segments. Okay, very easy, quick and easy, doesn't require any additional fabric. So if you don't have, 3 yards of a background fabric or an accent fabric sitting in the house, Candy Shop can be done without adding any additional fabric. So that jelly roll will give you a 48 by 60 quilt before you put any sort of border on it. Okay. Next up is Spiny Peaks. And Spiny Peaks is just like Step This Way, except it's on point. Okay. This quilt is going to get put together on the diagonal. So it uses 1 colored jelly roll and 1 white jelly roll. Okay. You're going to sew them into the same strip sets. Okay. Except the quilt is going to get laid out on point. Okay. Let me get my little quilt laid out here so I can show you what it looks like. All right. So this is basically the corner. Okay, you're going to lay out your rows. Okay, so row 1 has got 1 block, row 2 has 3, row 3 has 5, and they go up until 13 units across. Okay, and so when you are layering or assembling this, we're just offsetting the strip by 1 block so that this is going to become the outside edge, and we're going to square this up to be straight. Okay, so what you would do, and I'm just going to show you, is that once you have your quilt top finished, we need to go back and trim all the edges away so that we have a straight edge, not this jagged edge. And what we would do is you're going to lay your ruler down on the table. You're going to line up the 1/4-inch mark right at the intersection of the block. Okay, so right there, my 1/4-inch is going to go right here, my 1/4-inch is going to go right here. So let's get everything lined up, get it all lined up, and then I'm going to take my rotary cutter. I'm going to cut this way, and then we're going to come this way. Not so hot cutting sideways. Need a new rotary blade. But that's now the corner of your quilt. Okay. This is probably Spiny Peaks is one of my favorites out of the collection that we have. Okay. So all of these being basically the same concept of unit, just laid out in different ways, will result in a completely different look. Okay. Okay. Next up is going to be, so some of you may be wondering, well, okay, she's talking about this jelly roll. I don't know anything about a jelly roll, especially if you're a beginner, but a jelly roll typically has 42.5 by width of fabric strips in them. Okay. If you laid them end to end, okay, or sewed them end to end, a jelly roll measures approximately 1,680 inches. That's where the 1,600 quilt comes from. That's 140 feet or it's 46.5 yards in length. Okay, just a little bit of mathematics for the morning. So after we have now done the 2 strip sets, we move into a few projects that use larger numbers in their strip sets. Okay, first up being Smoothie Time. Smoothie Time actually uses 6 strips. Okay, this is one jelly roll is going to make a 48 by 48 inch quilt. Okay, so this quilt, we randomly sew 6 strips together. This should measure 12.5 inches. Okay, again, if it does not measure 12.5 inches, you need to measure what it is, and that's the size block that you're going to make. Okay, so I do measure 12.5 here. I'm going to straighten up my edge. Get rid of that. Studio needs a new rotary blade. And I'm going to measure over 12.5. And we're going to cut. Now, obviously, if this was a full strip width, you'd get more squares out of it than one. And then you're basically going to cut all your squares in all your strips into 12.5 inch squares, and then you're going to rotate them. You're going to have them laying some this way. You'll have some that go up and down, alternating across the rows and down the quilt. So another really quick and easy project to use a jelly roll, especially if you're not 100% sure what you want to do with something. It's very busy, it's bright. You could add, some solids in there if it was just too much to put all those particular prints together. But you could coordinate it. It's actually, if you have any like panel squares and things like that, these strip quilts here, Smoothie Time, and another one that we're going to be doing here in a moment, work really well to kind of frame any of those particular panel squares in to add a little bit of character to those panel quilts. Next up, we have Let's Dance. Okay, so Let's Dance. Let me grab my stuff. Choke myself on all these cords. Let's Dance, again, does a strip set. Okay, it's going to use one jelly roll, and then you're going to need 2 1/4 yards of what you see as white. That's the other half of the half square triangle that's in our project. So this project uses a 3 strip set. So this should be a 6.5 inch strip set when it's sewn. Again, sew it and then measure it. Do not do any of the cutting of the solid square until you know what size this square is going to be. Okay, so I would cut this into a 6.5 inch square. Okay, we're going to layer that with a solid square that's also 6.5. We're going to draw a line from corner to corner. We're making half square triangles basically, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch from the line, okay, on both sides. So if you can see there, it's a stitch there and a stitch there. Once you have that sewn, you're going to cut on that line. And you're going to get, every one of those units is going to give you 2 half square triangles, half of it being your setting fabric, and the other half being the strip set. Okay. This square, you're going to square up to being 5.5 inches square. Okay. And then you will be ready to lay them out in your own layout. The layout that is shown in the graphic here basically lays them all out so that your pieced strips are in the upper right hand corner, okay, for all of them. But you could lay this out in any way. So it lays them out any way like that. Let me cut another one here. Okay. You could easily rotate and lay them out so that you ended up with diamonds. You would have, you know, these diamonds of background fabric, anything along that line. So you can alternate your layout. Nothing says it has to lay out just like what you see in this graphic. Okay, but this is Let's Dance. All right. It takes just shy of 38 jelly rolls to make a mile. Okay, so take those 38 jelly rolls, lay them end to end. Let's look at 4 patches and techniques that we can do with 4 patches with a jelly roll. All right, this is Quadrangle. Uses 1 jelly roll or 36 strips of the jelly roll, leaving you 4 extra. You need 2.5 yards of setting and border. So the setting is the white that you see there. There's a white border that goes around the quilt. And then the cornerstones and the block centers is this gray, which can be either a fat 1/8 or 2 10-inch squares. Completely your choice. Quadrangle uses 4 patches. Okay, and let me change cameras again so we can talk about a 4 patch. So with a 4 patch, you're going to take and you're going to sew 2 2.5-inch strips together. Okay, you're going to subcut them into 2.5-inch segments. Okay, so then you'll basically measure over, cut 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, all the way across. You will take those 2 pieces and you're going to pick up 2 segments. You're going to put them right sides together. Your seams should nest in the back because they are going opposite directions because of the way you pressed. And then we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch. I highly suggest that you do a swirl press in the center, okay? Now, if you don't know what a swirl press is, I will show you. But you could just press the seam one direction, but it does make the center of your 4 patch bulky, okay? Sometimes we have a hard time getting it to lay flat. It's just because it's just thicker than the rest of it. So with a swirl press, what we do is you take a seam ripper and you're going to remove the few stitches that are in the seam allowance up to the last seam that you just sewed. This would be easier if I had a seam ripper, but do it on both sides. What that's going to do is when you open this, it's going to allow you to press half the seam one way and half the seam another. You're going to get an itty bitty baby 4 patch right in the middle of that. You can press it, and this is going to lay super flat, not bulky at all here in the middle of your 4 patch. So if you are a hand quilter or even a machine quilter, it's not going to be difficult to get through that center that's there. And now with Quadrangle, once you have your 4 patches completed, you're basically putting a sashing in between each 4 patch and then a row with cornerstones in between each. Okay, and again, if you own the AccuQuilt, you can use the 2.5-inch strip die to subcut your 2.5-inch units from your pieced strips. Okay, So Quadrangle is going to give you a 67 by 67 inch quilt. Short and long, same concept with the 4 patches. So the short, okay, is going to give you its 2 versions, same quilt, 2 versions. This is going to use the 2-inch or 2.5-inch subcut, and this is going to use the 4.5-inch subcut. Same quilt, same concept, except the unit that we sew into the squares. Okay, so so the one short unit is going to be basically your 4 patches sewn together into what we would call a 16 patch. Yeah, right. It's 4 across and 4 down. So it'd be a 16 patch. Or you can do the same concept with the 4.5-inch units that are on this table somewhere. You always think you have a big enough surface, and then you don't. So this would be the unit for the long version of the quilt. Okay, it's basically 2 4.5-inch units sewn together, and then 2 of those sewn together to create a square. So just another variation on that same 4-patch or rail fence unit that we did. Again, with AccuQuilt, to do the short version, you can do the 2.5-inch strip die to subcut, and with the long version, you can use the 4.5-inch strip die. And then you also, with this, it's 1 jelly roll, or you can use, and then sashing and border on the quilt is 1.5 yards of color of your choice. Okay. And then another variation of this concept, same concept, is what we call 3 at a time. Okay. So again, the front image there uses a 4-patch for your variation. Thank you. And the back image uses the rail fence for the variation. Using a jelly roll and 2 yards for your border and background fabric, you're going to get a 64 by 68 unit. Okay, so that you can see this. So you basically are sewing groups of 4 patches together to make those these units. Okay, and then you make long rows and then sew them together into the quilt top. And if you don't want to do 4 patches, you're much happier and prefer the speed of a rail fence, same concept. These are 4.5-inch units sewn together with the background fabric in between it to give you that particular variation. You know, all of these projects, especially these ones with the jelly rolls and things, make great charity quilts. Okay, there can be, especially this 3 at a time, can be very quick to go together, and that type of thing. So I like this. I love this look, this checkerboard tile look that you get in this front one that's there. And I think this back one would be really pretty and cozy out of flannel. So does anybody have a guess at how many 2.5-inch squares you can get out of a jelly roll? Any guesses? Hurry up, do your math real quick. 42 divided by 2.5 times 40 is what? Oh, it would totally make a good scrap quilt. And that's the other thing. I'll come back to the trivia question in a minute. This, if you have, every quilt you do, you take your scraps, you make a couple 4 patches, you toss them in a container, and then you sit down at a retreat and you sew those 4 patches into this particular quilt. And it's kind of like you have, if you did it once a year, it's like, oh, these are all the little pieces of fabric from all the quilts that I made this year. All right, I have a couple of guesses. So it's 640 is pretty, it's not exact because it all depends upon how much you take off for trimming off the selvage and things. But it's pretty average that you're going to be able to get 16 2.5-inch squares, okay, per jelly roll strip. And then a jelly roll has 40 strips in it. So 640 2.5-inch squares. If you ever need a lot of them, that's the way to go. And I would definitely either use an AccuQuilt or I would use a Stripology ruler to cut all of those 2.5-inch squares. All right, next up, we're going to look at the fold back corner technique that's used in both Illusions and in Sparkle. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so in Illusions uses a rectangle from your jelly roll, okay? And you are going to attach a triangle or square to one corner that we're going to sew and then fold back, okay? And that will get then made into a 2.5 by 4.5-inch rectangle. And that gets joined with a 2.5-inch square to create this unit. Okay, 4 of them comes together to create what looks like a 9 patch in the center with your points around the outside. Okay. So, and then the illusion coming from your sashing, you'll take your blocks, and it, depending on where your block is located, you will add a little triangle in the corner. And then when you sew your sashing in, you'll create a little churn dash at each intersection. Okay, so you get the illusion that you piece the 9 patch in the center of each star and a turn dash in the corner. So that's illusion. Okay, let me show you Sparkle, and then I will tell you how to get really good fold back corner points. Indy, we're going to talk about pinked edges in just a few minutes, and whether to use them or not. So I will get there. So, and here's Sparkle. Sparkle's the same unit, but we're going to put a triangle or a folded back corner on both ends. So this is the unit from Sparkle. We basically use that jelly roll print strip, your border background fabric for these fold back corners, and then you are going to sew them in together into pairs of 2s, and then you will have rotate your pairs of 2s with a sashing and a cornerstone in the middle. Okay, so let me talk about these folded corners. So I told you we take a rectangle, 2.5 by 4.5. Okay, so if you have an AccuQuilt, you can easily cut your jelly roll strips into 4.5 using your 4.5-inch strip die. You're going to take your background fabric and you're going to cut them into 2.5-inch strips, and then cut your 2.5-inch squares. You're going to draw a line from corner to corner. Okay, if you're not into drawing lines from corner to corner, there are a lot of things to help you. You've got easy anglers, there is diagonal seam tape, there is fold back corner rulers, there's all sorts of stuff. But I'm going to talk to you about doing it with a drawn line. I'm going to place that square on top of the corner, okay, in the corner that I need. I need to make sure that the line that I drew is going in the direction that it needs to go, okay? Because if this was rotated, then it's going to go a different direction and fall into a different corner, which, you know, ultimately is not a big deal, but in illusion, we need one corner to go this way and one corner to go the other. It's not going to work real well if one corner goes this way, you're going to end up with a flying geese and not a parallelogram. Now, the next thing that most of them tell you is to sew on the line. You're like, yay, I have a line to follow. I don't have to, guess. I don't stitch on the line, okay? I prefer, and I suggest, I recommend, that you don't stitch on the line, that you actually stitch to the outside of the line. And the reason for this is, let me find mine. If you stitch right on the line, okay, so this one's stitched right on the line. If you have drawn a really thick line, where is right on the line if the line is really thick? Okay? It's kind of like we need to stitch with a scant 1/4 of an inch when we sew units together. When we do these folded corner techniques, you actually need a scant, because you're not taking into, you've got to take into account that this fabric's got to fold up and over that seam right there. And if we are sewing, honestly, if we're sewing right into the corner and back, when I fold this back, our goal is that this folded corner should actually come up and meet the edge of this 4.5 by 2.5 inch print. And you can see, if I fold that corner up, it's actually short right here, okay? And it's short a little bit right here as well, okay? So when I sew any fold back corner technique, I actually sew to the outside of the line, just right next to it, not on top of it, right next to it. And I want to sew in the direction of where I'm going to be trimming off. You don't want to sew into the block. We want to sew away from the block. So now that I've sewn a little bit to the outside of that line, when I go to press this back, here, let me trim the seam allowance. I'm going to trim my seam allowance, putting the 1/4 inch on the drawn line, okay, not the stitched line, but the drawn line, and then I can fold this back. And you can see, folded back, that folded corner comes right to the top of that 2.5 by 4.5, okay? So if you're having problems with folded corner techniques, that things are not coming out, here, let me trim my bad one so that you can see it. Okay, so if you're having issues with folded corners like this, coming out like this and not matching, now this is no longer 2.5 inches tall, think about and pay attention to where you're sewing. And I would sew just next to the line that you drew. Okay, that is my tidbit for fold back corners. Okay, that's going to help you get your corners to match the unit that it needs to roll up against next to. Okay, so that's Illusion and Sparkle. Same concept with the fold back corner. Illusion just has one fold back corner per rectangle, and Sparkle has 2. Okay, all right, did you know that every jelly roll is rolled and tied by hand? Okay, they're rolled and tied by hand, and if you laid all the jelly rolls, the circles, end to end, Moda has pretty much rolled enough jelly rolls to wrap Earth at least twice. So the question is pinked edges versus no pinked edges, and do you include them in your measurement? Okay. The thing about a pinked edge is they're a much smaller pinked edge today than what they used to be when they first started. And the reason that we have the pinked edge is so that it doesn't ravel, okay, and that you can still maintain your full 2.5 inch strip, because I know y'all, you like things pretty. You're not gonna pick up a jelly roll if it is full of strings, okay? So the Moda jelly rolls are pinked Some other companies don't pink their jelly rolls. They are straight cut, but usually they're wrapped in packaging. Because of that, you can, some boutiques are pretty much straight cut with batik because they are they're woven a little bit tighter than anything. It's going to depend upon the company. And what I would do is I would take your jelly roll strip and I would measure it. Okay. Find where the 2.5 inches. Okay. Is the 2.5 from the top of the pink to the top of the pink on the other edge? Or is it from the valley of the pinking to the valley of the pinking? Okay. Typically, I am used to the 2.5 inches incorporating from tip of the pink to tip of the pinking. Okay, it includes all of it, and I leave it. I don't cut it off. Okay, I have a tip that I'm going to show you for this quilt, Savannah Squares, at making sure that you have a nice size strip. So there's not a straight answer about the pinking. The industry, or you guys, have a love-hate relationship with the pinking. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people will trim it off, but you are probably going to end up taking some of your width away from it. So I would measure your strip first. Okay. All right. Savannah Squares is going to be what I would call, I'm not advanced, but it does have a lot more steps to it and techniques. It does use or call for a ruler. Okay. It doesn't have to be any of the two rulers that I have shown there. Okay. But we're going to be using the jelly roll to make half square triangles. And so we need a ruler that's going to cut that 45-degree angle. Okay? So let's look at Savannah Squares. Find my button here. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to show you with Savannah Squares is I'm going to show you with a half square triangle ruler. Okay. So this one that that's showing here is the one from Marty Michelle. It's a multi-size. It has different, can make up to, I think it's a 6.5 inch half square triangle. I'm going to demonstrate using the Creative Grids half square triangle ruler. Okay. So as long as it is a 45-degree triangle ruler, there's the Easy Angler. There's a couple of other Marty Michelle rulers, that type of thing, that are out there. With these rulers, what you want to do is you want to cut your background and your print together. Okay? So I'm going to take my background fabric and my print fabric, and I'm going to put them right sides together. And the reason that we do this is so that I'm going to cut this from the white side so you can see. They're already together and ready for us to feed into the machine. We're not taking two stacks and having to line up and match the edges. They're already going to be right sides together and aligned for us. So with most of the half square triangle rulers, you're going to find the size that you want your half square to finish. Okay. So I want this to be a 2-inch finished half square triangle, right? Because it's a 2.5 inch strip. If we were to make a half square triangle, it's going to be a 2-inch finished. So I'm going to put my ruler down. I'm going to line up the 2-inch, it's hard to see, but the 2-inch line on the seam here, on the bottom of my fabric, and I'm going to cut. Okay. And then I'm going to rotate. I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to cut this way. So it's going to remove one dog ear for me. Okay. Now I could take this ruler, okay, and we could come and clip off the dog ear, okay, that's there, and remove it, but we can also do it after we sew. We would then take it to the machine and sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down, and then when you open this, you're going to have a half square triangle, okay? So that's how and by cutting them together, they're already together, ready for you just to stack them up and feed them into the machine, okay? So I'm sure that many of you have a half square triangle ruler in your stash somewhere, okay? Now, the other ruler that many of you probably have is a strip tube ruler from Cozy Quilts. Okay, there's a regular size and there's a junior size. This is the regular. The junior does the same thing. It's just smaller, not as giant to handle for a small strip. With the strip tube ruler, the way that you make half square triangles with it is you actually sew your strips together on both sides. So I've put my fabrics right sides together. They are stitched 1/4 inch down each side, okay? Because what's going to happen is I'm going to take my strip tube ruler, the line that I want to finish here is going to go on the stitching line. So I'm going to put the 2.5 inch line on my stitching line. Let me make sure I did that right. Align the 2.5 inch line on the bottom stitching line and cut both sides of the triangle. Okay. I don't use this ruler to do half square triangles often because I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. You're going to cut up and you'll cut down. Okay. You may have a couple of stitches from the other side hanging out there, but that will cut. And then you're like, well, why do you sew both sides? Because this way, when you now flip the ruler and you repeat this, now this bottom is sewn, okay? And we would line up the seam and cut my strip and pull it apart. And I have half square triangles. The reason I'm not a super fan of using this particular ruler to make half square triangles, does anybody know why? Could you tell? Okay. This ruler, the 45-degree ruler, and this ruler. You are sewing in this ruler. Yeah, you got it, Miss Danette. The 45-degree triangle ruler, you've cut the bias. This is where you're going to sew. That means that the outside edge of this triangle is straight and crosswise grain, okay? This ruler, let me flip these over so you can see them better. This ruler, your straight and crosswise grain are sewn. The outside edges of your half square triangle are all biased. Okay, which is nothing wrong with that. But you just need to be very careful when you are pressing and you are sewing because this is super stretchy. Okay, so again, it's not difficult to do. You just need to be conscious that these half square triangles done with the strip tube ruler are all biased edged. Okay, versus using your 45-degree triangle rulers is going to allow you to sew the bias and keep the non-stretchy part of the fabric on the outside edge of your half square triangle. Okay? So that is Savannah squares. Okay? The unit is basically, actually, let me go back to the camera so that you can see. The unit is, you are making 4 of these per block. There's a half square triangle, there's some 4 patches, rectangles, and a half square triangle in the corner. 4 of those per block with sashing and a cornerstone through the middle. And then when you join them together, this is the way it will look. This is a 93 by 93 quilt. Okay, so it is big. It does use a lot. This is kind of one that has to be a planned project because it is going to use a lot of background. Okay, you have one jelly roll. Your block sashing or accent fabric is the gold that you see in the image. The cornerstone being a fat eighth or an eighth of a yard. That's the little unit that's between each churn dash. I think it's gray. That's here. And then all your white background, and there's a white border on the quilt, is 7.5 yards. Okay, is needed. All right. Now, we can't just live in a world of squares and rectangles, right? All right, so while I grab my other stuff, what has more yardage of fabric? Jelly roll or a layer cake? Any guesses? Which one has got more fabric in it? Yeah, I would definitely, if you are going to use the strip tube ruler to make half square triangles or anything like that, or use that method of half square triangles, definitely some best press. It's right. It is the same. They both have about 2 3/4 yards of fabric. So that's just in different shapes. You get long and skinny 2 3/4 yards, or you get fat and short. Or, that's there. So like I said, we can't live in the world of just having squares and rectangles. Let's talk about a hexagon. Okay. We are going to look at 2 quilts that use the hexagon unit just in 2 different ways. First one up here is Taffy. And Taffy is going to require you to lay it out so that you can get the look of little servings of taffy wrappers. Okay, so that's where kind of the name comes from, is it looks like a little piece of taffy and there's the little end tassels on the wrappers. So you will need to lay this out before you start assembling. You are going to need 1 jelly roll plus 2 additional fat quarters or 5 fat eighths to be able to create the 53 by 57 quilt. You're going to need a yard of fabric to do the top and bottom and the border on the quilt. You need something to square off the quilt. And then we need a 2.5 inch half hexagon template. We have one here in the store that was specifically designed for Project Jelly Roll. I believe there's an AccuQuilt template for this. There is lots of 2.5 inch, and if you download these patterns, there is a template, so you don't have to have the ruler. You can use the template. I'm pretty sure the Hex and More from Jaybird Quilts that a lot of you probably have from doing Nebula with Tula Pink and Jaybird. You have that will cut a 2.5 inch hexagon. You used it in your journey to Nebula. You also can use that to cut your half square triangles as well. So you should be pretty proficient in that world if you're doing Nebula. But basically what's going to happen is you're going to, in Taffy, you're going to take your jelly roll strips. You're going to lay your hexagon template down on top, and you're going to cut both sides on the first one, okay? And then after you cut your side, you've got a little dog ear to clip here. One here. There. Okay. You'll have a hexagon, and then from there out, you'll be able to alternate up and down, and trim just one side of the ruler, clipping both dog ears. Okay. So you will have all of these little hexagons that are happening here. And then in order to create the end unit of your half hexagon, somewhere around here, there is a, 1 second, let's find it. I really have an absolute mess. A 2.5 inch square. Let me get a 2.5 inch square here. So we're going to take a 2.5 inch square. You're going to lay your hexagon template on top of it, right at the edge here, so that you can trim off this particular piece. And this will become the unit to square off your edge. Okay. Oh, look, there's my 2.5 inch square. And then you lay out your quilt. Okay. Taffy is assembled vertically. So your rows are going to be assembled, okay, vertically. Okay. And so this would be the way that it goes. Attach your square off piece, assemble your row, and then take your rows and start assembling them together. Okay. Very easy. Okay. Matches pretty well. Didn't really have much of a problem. I only have 2 rows here. But a quick, easy, fun project using half square triangles. Miss Indy, I don't think the Hexenmoor will cut, the Hexenmoor doesn't have this particular shape on it. It may only cut 60-degree triangles. I don't think it will cut halves. The Super Sidekick may cut. I think the Super Sidekick may cut half square triangles. I think the Hexenmoor is going to be 60-degree triangles at the tip. Okay. The other the other hexagon project that I have for you, so that's Taffy, 53 by 57, is Tiddlywinks. I didn't change the picture. So, no, that's not Taffy, that's not Tiddlywinks. That's the same picture. I forgot to change it. Oh, well. Can't have an exact. This is Tiddlywinks. Okay? So, Tiddlywinks uses the same hexagon tool. Okay? 1 jelly roll and fabric for your, and 2.5 yards of fabric for the borders and the center units. Tiddlywinks is created with sewing the rows horizontally, okay? And that will then assemble the column. Basically, what we're doing with Tiddlywinks is you are alternating. Yeah. Okay. I'm almost done.
Okay, that's fine.
You're going to be alternating the hexagon up and down. Okay. And you will then lay them right sides together and sew that angle. Okay. And then attach the other one to the other side. And then you have another rectangle. You're going to use a rectangle on this one and not a 2.5 inch square, but you're going to do the same technique. You're going to take your rectangle and lay your hexagon template on it and cut at an angle. Okay? And then that gives you the angle that needs to be attached to the hexagon to finish it off, square off the edge. That's there. Okay. So that's Tiddlywinks. Sorry about that. I will fix that graphic before I upload it to the website for you. And we'll put the right picture in there. And you tell that was probably about 11:30 last night when I got to that. Okay. So I wanted to thank you. That is what I have for you today. So this is all the projects. So I hope you found something that will maybe inspire you to use a jelly roll. Maybe create your own jelly roll, cut your own, anything along that lines. I hope that you will take a moment today and maybe unroll a jelly roll, maybe untie the bow, maybe. It's very hard, I know. But we are glad that you joined us this morning, and I hope that you keep calm and sew a jelly roll. So be sure the link here in the description for this live will be there for you to download all 15 of the patterns. I will also be moving this recording to YouTube later this afternoon. So on our website, you can go to the YouTube tab. You'll be able to download this presentation as well as link directly to the YouTube video for later reference, and the link will be there as well. So thank you, everybody, and we hope that you have a fantastic day, and thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody. Happy National Sew a Jelly Roll.